Hey, everybody. Thank you very much, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Senator Gardner, I want you to know there are a couple of people from Senator Michael Bennett's office, also from Colorado, here snapping pictures of you in your tie to use in your next Colorado race, because they don't wear.
This violates a number of outdoor rules in Colorado.
We were debating whether I wear one or not, but I just needed to show you up, so I'm sorry. So anyway, Senator, thanks so much for joining us. We're talking about cybersecurity, the cyber pipeline, the cyber world today, and I guess you are, as I understand it, chair of the Senate Cybersecurity Caucus. Each year we've gone into this, and we've at the Atlantic have been covering this for a long time. It seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. So the more I talk to cyber experts and thinking about this, there seems to be a sense of fragility and what in the hell is going on. And with this later global cyber virus ransomware that went on, that came about, plus Russian hacking into the election. Can you give us any sense of whether, if we meet in a year from now, this is going to be worse or better?
It's a great question. I don't remember what publication it was in that I read just yesterday or the day before, but it was an article about how all of us, how so many members of Congress had said that we are woefully unprepared and we have to do something. Right. And it went back several years, and it said we are woefully unprepared, we have to do something. Then it'd show another tweet from another month, oh, we're woefully unprepared, we have to do something. I can remember a conversation after the election. It was sometime around Christmas. I was standing out in the front porch so I wouldn't wake the kids up at home. It was freezing cold in Colorado on the front porch as I was having a conversation on the phone with Chris Coons of Delaware, talking about an editorial an op-ed that we'd put together that ended up running in Time about cybersecurity. And it was about the need to create a select committee on cybersecurity. And here we are, 6 months later, 7 months later, no action, no hearing, nothing on an idea that's as simple as creating a standalone committee on cybersecurity so we can have a whole of government approach. So I would hope that in a year from now we can look back and say we've made a number of advancements. But in terms of the structure of government, in terms of how responsive our public policy is to the needs in cyber, it doesn't look any different today than it did really a year ago. But I hope that in a year from now it will.
You're a sponsor of the Patch Act. What does the Patch Act do?
The Patch Act is one of the conversations that we started looking at this encryption issue, a year ago or more now, with San Bernardino, and it was this argument over when law enforcement needs to find information from an encrypted device, whose responsibility is it to help? What's the debate that takes place? And one of the things that we would argue about is, all right, so if law enforcement then finds a vulnerability, do they have an obligation to tell the technology company, the provider, the producer, the developer, about that vulnerability? And so this is a sort of an outcropping of that concern, when, especially this week, when we see the ransomware attack, that if our investigators, our agencies, our intelligence bureaus and departments find a vulnerability in software, this the Patch Act tries to create a system where they let that developer know about this, this loophole, this problem, this vulnerability, so that they can patch that.
Would that work in San Bernardino? In that case,
they are different.
There was a
those
legal
are two
battle
different.
with Apple, and then finally they suspended that legal battle because somehow they came by a technical fix that allowed them to penetrate that. So ostensibly they found a pathway in, and I'm sure they didn't share that with Apple.
See, and that's the debate. This is an extension of that same debate, not the same circumstances, obviously, not the same exact fact.
But it would still be them stockpiling vulnerabilities.
But it's still stockpiling vulnerabilities.
Brad Smith of Microsoft has been saying, the National Security Agency and the federal agencies need to stop doing that, because if those come out, then you have what has just evolved with this.
Well, if you do it without telling anybody, it's certainly a problem. But if you do it in a way that then gets back to the developer and says, hey, here's the problem, you got to fix it, and they fix it, then that takes care of it. There are going to be national security concerns that we have to weigh, and the legislation tries to take that into account. But the bottom line is, that's a conversation that we are not yet equipped to have in the Senate, the House, and that's why people like Mark Warner and I and Michael McCall on the House side have tried to create sort of working groups on encryption, privacy, and security to address these questions. Mark Warner and I have created the first ever cyber caucus in the Senate to try to create an educational platform where we can come together and have these debates, because, like I said, government today, the way we handle these issues, looks like government did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. From an institutional standpoint, we just don't have the tools yet to be able to have these debates like we should.
And I ask this in a friendly okay, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank the digital literacy, the cyber literacy of your complete staff?
You know, I was asked one time what my favorite part of the Senate was, and I said hip replacement Wednesdays.
Okay, enough said. I asked this in a serious way. When I worked in the Senate in the 1990s, I would say, I saw this. The Atlantic Media Company recently, I think we have about 600 employees. Our head of tech tested us, and I think shouldn't be out there, probably about 40% of us didn't fall into the trap that was set, but significant other people did when it came by phishing, and so that resulted in us actually losing control of, we have to double password, double entry. I mean, we do all the things that one would do. And I know that doesn't exist in the Senate, so I'm just wondering how penetrable the Senate is.
Well, look, I think that's a really great point, and in fact,
because you're not exhibiting the behaviors that you're hoping the private sector does.
Exactly, and I think that's where one of the ideas that we're pursuing with a couple of my colleagues, Mark Warner and others, we're trying to put in place that basic. If you're a software developer, if you're somebody in the tech sector, you know to do this already, but sometimes the Senate and members themselves don't practice this, don't follow this, but we should be demanding of ourselves, and we should also, as a government, start to look at ways that we can demand this of our vendors as well. You think about things like basic cyber hygiene, things like authentication. Yesterday I had a conversation with a tech CEO, and the 5 fundamental aspects of cyber hygiene that we talked about. You all know this far better than any of us, but multi-factor authentication, strong encryption of data, micro-segmentation, consistent and authentic patches, upgrades, consistent education and testing. And this CEO's point when he laid those out was one of those five factors, basic, simple computer hygiene concepts, were absent in the ransomware attack that just spread around the globe. One of those basic 5 was missing in the OPM breach. One of those 5 was missing in the North Korea attack on Sony. And so those are 5 pretty simple concepts that most people understand, but there was one missing that allowed those significant breaches, those significant hacks to occur. So is there some way that we can create almost like a underwriter's laboratory standard of vendor to make sure that they're meeting these things? We don't want to overregulate, but we also want good practices to spread from the government to the private sector, from the private sector to the government, in a way that reflects this reality of cyber security.
One of the things that strikes me, and I don't know if all this, Senator, Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel, was absolutely doggedly obsessed with Y2K and the vulnerabilities of the Y2K issue in software. And I remember at that time in the Senate, the amount of money that was set aside, work with the private sector, create partnerships, deal with these vulnerabilities in software as it was in that time. And, year 2000 kind of came and went, and we sort of got through it. What I've been amazed by is that despite given all of these attacks, we haven't had a similar level of kind of mutual commitment from private sector and government, at least that I feel, to deal with something that's sort of staggeringly more consequential than we had when Andy Grove was driving the charge on Y2K. And it sort of seems to be a big disparity in effort.
That's a really good point. When I live in an area of Colorado, way out in the eastern plains, out by Kansas, there are actually people who moved from the city out to the eastern plains to places like where I live because they were afraid that something was going to happen. And I can remember my first visit to India, talking to some software developers in India. And, for them, Y2K was fantastic because they were tasked with developing software. So many companies in India were a part of, all right, how do we build this patch or that patch, and what are we going to do in Y2K? And they were, really one of the bubbles of development in India occurred right around that. And so if you're looking at these 5 simple ideas, you would think that we could have that partnership, that innovation, that we would join together and use
Donald
that.
Trump could say, "Jobs in America, fix the patch,
fix it now." Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, so do you sense that there's any kind of momentum along that way? I mean, one of the other things that occurred to me in discussion a while back. You remember the old reports that were used? They were sort of propaganda reports for the Pentagon called Soviet military power. and they were annual reports on
Can you
each year.
bring up propaganda and Soviets in today's environment? I don't know.
Yeah. But you know, they were useful because it kind of elevated for the public why this was important, how things had changed year to year. And years ago, I said, you know, maybe there needs to be some sort of document on cybersecurity. That's 10 years ago. Why don't we create an annual document mainly for the American public to understand these deficits and and at the time, you know, the people that were at the top of the cyber chain thought it would be dangerous and counterproductive to inform the U.S. public.
You know, we have run into a couple of circumstances, you know, along those same lines. Education is key. I mean, education of members of the Senate so that we can help pass that along to people so we can better craft legislation, we can better protect the staff and the information that we have, and to be able to provide, you know, public service announcements, guidances. I think I made up a word, guidances. Guidance to make sure that we can get that out to the American people in a way that evolves every year based on the changing technologies, changing threats, and the actualities of what have occurred. So I think that would be a great way forward. But I also think that we have, during the Defense Authorization Act last year, we actually offered an amendment where we tried to get an assessment of critical infrastructure within our systems, defense systems, intelligence agencies that came from vendors that we have questions about. And the pushback against that amendment was intense. And we were doing this in a completely...
You wanted transparency.
We wanted transparency, but it would have been classified. It would have been, you'd have to have clearance to see it. It would have been something that, you know, we're not posting to the internet so people can see it.
Classified anymore?
I hope so. We have to.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure we're
doing
doing
the
everything we
notion
can
of
to do it.
something being classified and thus remaining classified is the fragility of that is something that's come up today. And what do you tell us what you think personally about Russia and its behavior in the cyber?
Well, again, I think when you look at those great threats that people talk about, I can go into any government agency or into any private sector business, and they all name the same handful of actors that they see every day. They talk about Russia and the sophistication, not just of, you know, whether it's a Russia military issue or a government-backed effort or sort of a organized crime effort or a mafia-type business association that is running cyber attacks against the government as well as the private sector. Of course, what they did in the government to try to interfere in the election to try to interfere with the election is simply unacceptable of a nation, and that's so. It's a big concern. It's a big challenge. I mean, China is up there, and Iran is up there, North Korea is up there. Last night I attended the ITI show, and we were looking at one of the companies that had a booth there, and I think it was Akamai that was there, and they zoomed in on Colorado, and it was a real-time analysis of the cyber attacks that were hitting Colorado. I took a screenshot of it, but at that moment,
it was a real-time picture of what was happening.
It was the state of Colorado. It was real-time, you know, across their networks that
NORAD
they were
there
detecting.
or something, or is there something special about
obviously,
Denver?
we have NORAD, Northcom, Buckley. Buckley has a lot of intelligence work there. 292,000 cyber events were taking place.
I mean, that movie War Games was really...
Now, how many remember War Games? Now, I remember the real War Games, not the new one. I mean the real one. This Matthew Broderick. You guys remember that? All right, very good.
Yeah.
Let's start talking Red Dawn now. I mean, this is great.
It's all Colorado.
That's right.
Just get the spelling right. You know, when you talk to President Trump, do you spend much time with President Trump?
Not. We've spent a couple times in meetings, but not a great length.
Have you talked about cyber with him, these cyber issues?
Have not had this opportunity, no. I have with various members of his staff and security team.
And how would you rate their I mean, this White House is of your party. How would you rate their sensitivity, their deploying forces along these lines? I'm looking for a good story here because I don't see much good from the White House in terms of dealing with some of the Russia threats, cyber threats.
Well, I hope that you know we continue to have more conversations with them about what we're doing in the to prepare for this new future of cyber. They're very interested in conversations we're having about the Internet of Things, the working groups that Brian Schatz, myself, Deb Fisher, Cory Booker have put together. We're talking billions of devices in the Internet of Things that will all be surfaces and opportunities to enter. So we have to have our cyber policies and security efforts right. And also, I think they're very interested in our efforts as it relates to legislation we passed last Congress, which set up, as it relates to North Korea, the first ever mandatory cyber sanctions structure. And so one of the elements that passed in the North Korea Sanctions Act, in addition to economic sanctions, or cyber sanctions. These are mandatory investigations that have to take place if we suspect North Korea of some cyber aggression, and mandatory sanctions on entities that are helping them do that. Now, they have not done this yet, although they're considering it, and I think that that's a good.
Who's they? The White House?
The administration, yeah.
So in a case like North Korea, which is, I remember the day at the time the Sony attacks were happening. I had Monaco and some others in a program at that time, and there was some challenge that maybe the private sector wasn't doing as much as it needed to do. That there were elements of what the government could do, but there was sort of a dereliction of. They didn't say that, but call it dereliction of performance responsibility in the private sector broadly. How do you get that balance right between the private sector and the government, and beyond sanctions, but at a certain level, the vulnerabilities are out there because the private sector has.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's a great question because once in a while I come up with some really lame ideas. And some people may think that's all I come up with.
What's the lamest idea?
We were trying to figure out, all right, could we create some kind of we have Energy Star at the EPA. Could we create at the Department of Energy, EPA, could we create a cyber star? Right. And we have this cyber star label, and it's fantastic. And it says that if you have this cyber star label, then it means that you are cyber secure and hack proof. Right. Yeah. It's just nothing like putting a big bullseye on your back and say, "Come hack me."
New challenge.
Yeah. So that was a really lame idea.
Right.
But it led to a deeper conversation about how do we set up industry sort of led standards with a partnership with the federal government. I think that's what you're seeing at NIST and some of the guidelines that they've put out in terms of this guidance and efforts they're putting together on good cyber policies. Those 5 things that I talked about, that I had that conversation about, that's not, as one very infamous Colorado legislator once said, it's not rocket surgery. The former legislator. Those 5 things should be carried out by everybody in the private sector and government, and so we should look at that. But that's what we need to be doing is creating that sort of federal private partnership that we can learn from each other, we share with each other. A quick story, though. We have to live up to our side of this, the federal government does. We had a cyber hearing the other day with a group of utilities at the Energy Committee, and the utility had a inspector come in, an analyst come in, a cyber expert come in and do a review of their cyber policies and equipment. They walk through this utility's control room. Afterwards, they're sitting down together, getting a review of the findings, and the analyst says, you have a piece of equipment in your control room that would never be allowed in a federal facility. And of course, the utility says, well, which piece of equipment? And the analyst says, well, I can't tell you, it's classified. It sounds like a bad movie, but I mean, that's what we have to get over that, and it's a real occurrence, so we have to make sure that we're being good partners in this effort.
I want to take just one question. We have 10 minutes. Before I do that, you have to go ask you what you think about the Robert Mueller decision, because that is, in fact, the Russia investigation kind of pursuing this very much heart terrain. Do you think we're moving in a better direction? Are there parts of this that remain wobbly for you despite that?
Well, I've said all along that we simply need more information. We need transparency, and we need more information. And if this gets the information we need, then I'm supportive of it. It's the right decision. I think Director Mueller has an incredible reputation. But let's get the facts, let's get the information, and let's proceed with all haste.
Great. Let me take, we have a question, comment? Yeah, right up here. We're going to give you a microphone here. We have millions of people watching online. The Russians are watching online.
Okay. My name is Walter Bedrajic. I'm from Chicago, Museum of Broadcast Communication. Question is about what role can the government have with private businesses who say, oh, we no longer support this platform. So if you have XP or something even older, the reason you haven't gotten any kind of security updates is we don't support it anymore. Hey, guess what? We still have them in millions of devices.
So what about that? The legacy vulnerabilities, we'll call them, of the system out there, which Microsoft has begun to try to address.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with that? Because it seems to me to be.
It is a great question. I mean, that's one of those things too, where if you look at the federal government probably is the only institution in the entire world that still has multiple agencies with the computing ability to play Oregon Trail. And I mean the original Oregon Trail. Vulnerabilities are a big issue, and on those older legacy systems. And maybe there's some kind of a stockpile we could create, almost like like our petroleum stockpile, where we can figure out a database, data bank, so to speak, of old systems that allow us to update them in a way that almost open source kind of environment that gets that information out to legacy systems. I look at our family business. We sell farm equipment. It's a business that probably, I haven't checked last time, but I don't know that my dad is the best at updating his computers all the time. And so what does that mean for that business?
Somebody's tweeting that right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Cory
right.
Gardner's dad is the source of vulnerability.
Yeah, they sell farm equipment. Somebody, I guess, could hack a tractor and make it spell something in the field, but I don't know that they'll have much fun with it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Cory Gardner, thank you
Thanks for
very,
having me.
very much.
Thank you.
Really great. Thank you very much.